My name is Alyssa Dolger, and I will be presenting the Adaptations of Fagin. Quote, "Anti-Semitism is not just a problem for the Jews. It is a problem for all of our society." Unquote. Ephraim Mirvis. Even today, anti-Semitism still exists. Not only does it exist in Western Europe and the Muslim world, but in America as well. In the 1800s, Jews were facing a lot of prejudice in England. During that time period, Charles Dickens published Oliver Twist in 1837. A complex antagonist in this novel, Fagin has long been considered as the portrait of anti-Semitism in English literature. Fagin was originally introduced as a vile villain, and since the novel's original publishing, many have created their own adaptation of Oliver Twist in Fagin's character. Sarah Phelps, BBC's resident adapter of literary works, put her own unique twist on Fagin in the classic novel in her 2007 miniseries, Oliver Twist. Phelps used her adaptation of Fagin to call out and expose anti-Semitism and the corruption Jews faced in the 19th century. In the beginning of the 19th century, Europe was undergoing many economic and social changes. Jews were emancipated, which led to the rise of anti-Semitism. This was a term coined in 1879 to describe prejudice against Jews. Jews were now able to live and work freely among non-Jews, own their own land, and even serve in the national armed forces. Non-Jews, specifically Christians, had a problem with this change. Especially in Europe, as Christianity became more popular, anti-Semitism did too. Many Christians would accuse Jews of crimes, and Christian attitudes towards Jews were reflected in economic, social, and political policies at the time. In some countries and cities, Jews had to wear distinct clothing to distinguish themselves and also had to reside in specific areas. Jews were also picked on and criminalized as they began to take advantage of banking and money lending. At the time, Christianity was against lending money for interest, which is why only the Jews were partaking in the money lending and banking. This led to the expulsion of Jews from multiple countries in Europe. Author Charles Dickens published Oliver Twist in 1837. His novel illustrated an impoverished London and spoke to the belief that poverty leads to crime. Oliver Twist follows the journey of a young boy born in a workhouse in England. His name was Oliver Twist. Oliver was raised in poor conditions as an orphan for the majority of his childhood and adolescence. He suffered from abuse, manipulation, and malnourishment. Even as a child, he was expected to work, and the adults in his life never gave him the opportunity to be a kid. Oliver went from one terrible situation to another, and he was haunted by the fact that his mother was gone and he would never get to meet her. Fagin was another important character in the book, but he played the role of an antagonist. Living in poverty himself, Fagin taught young, homeless boys in London how to pickpocket and then made profit off of their stolen goods. Fagin and his school for fingersmiths was just another one of the many dreadful situations Oliver had to endure. Fagin was introduced to readers as, quote, "a very old shriveled Jew whose villainous-looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown with his throat bare." Unquote. Dickens 58. Throughout the novel, Fagin was more often referred to as the Jew than he was by his own name. This constant referral characterized him as a stereotypical Jew, ultimately bringing more hate and prejudice towards the ethnicity. Dickens further purposely showcased Fagin as an ugly, corrupt, miserable, greedy man to fit in with the racist narrative Jews were given during that time. In the article Anti-Semitism and Social Critique in Dickens' novel Oliver Twist, author Susan Myers analyzes the portrayals of Christians and Jews in Oliver Twist. Meyer acknowledges the irony regarding how Dickens displays sympathy in the novel towards the poor and socially marginalized for what Christians have been willing to do, yet makes it a key aspect that one of the main antagonists is a Jew. Meyer states, quote, "Not only does Dickens pointedly and repeatedly term him the Jew, but he emphasizes aspects of his character familiar from the anti-Semitic tradition, namely his miserliness, his greed, his exotic and strange appearance, his effeminacy, his obsequiousness, his cowardliness, and the size of his nose." Unquote. Meyer 239. This further instills the idea that Dickens himself was prejudiced against Jews and targeted them through his work. Although Dickens used many of his novels to campaign, he still managed to hurt, instead of help, an entire population through Oliver Twist. According to Dickens, one reason Fagin was constantly referred to as the Jew was because he was the only non-Christian in the story. Dickens also stated that he chose to have Fagin as the only Jew in the story, quote, because it unfortunately was true of the time to which the story refers that the class of criminal almost invariably was a Jew, unquote, independent. However, Fagin was not the only criminal in the story. He actually had a whole bandit of pickpockets and fellow criminals, to which Dickens never referred by their religion. While a huge point of Oliver Twist was to campaign against the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, Dickens also accomplished to encourage vile prejudice against Jews by letting his own bias get in the way of this crucial element to the novel. In 2007, BBC came out with a 5-episode miniseries of Oliver Twist. The miniseries was written by Sarah Phelps and directed by Koki Gierdrick. This adaptation of the iconic novel Oliver Twist follows alongside the adventures of Oliver in Victorian London. While the overall original storyline and plot remain, there are a number of distinct changes and mutations throughout the miniseries. Arguably, the most significant change writer Sarah Phelps made was through her adaptation of Fagin. In Phelps' adaptation, Fagin is a person first, and he genuinely cares about Oliver. Phelps foremost softened Fagin's character in the 2007 miniseries. While still a poor, corrupt thief, his character is less demonic. He takes on more of a father figure role with the boys, and he shows throughout the series that he cares about Oliver. In this adaptation, viewers are truly able to see Fagin in a new light. Instead of being just a Jew, he is a complex character who evokes a strain of emotional responses among viewers, including pity. To continue, in Phelps' adaptation, quote, we also see an appeal to sympathy for Fagin in being asked to recant his Jewish beliefs by appealing to a Christian God upon being sentenced to death. It brings light to the very real anti-Semitism of the Victorian era, unquote, the Cabinet Journal of Victorian Curiosities. Phelps understood the original portrayal of Fagin and further recognized the prejudice and harm it caused. In an article from The Telegraph, Jasper Rees wrote, quote, she was uncomfortable with Dickens' anti-Semitism. Her response has been to make his Jewishness more explicit than in any previous portrayal. This Fagin wears a yarmulke, and, while the boys eat the sausages he prepares with his toasting fork, he doesn't. Nor does he send potential snitches to the gallows. The point about Fagin is he has to be a survivor, Phelps argues, unquote, Rees. While Dickens argued that Jews were mainly criminals in Victorian London, Phelps recognized that they were fighters. She understood what they went through and what they faced during that time, and she mutated her own version of Fagin to more so accurately depict who Jews truly were back then and who they are today. There are many differences between the original novel Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens and the 2007 miniseries written by Sarah Phelps. In Oliver Twist the novel, Fagin, again, was first described as, quote, a very old shriveled Jew, whose villainous-looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair, unquote, Dickens 58. Fagin was also constantly referred to as the Jew throughout the novel, possibly more than he was referred to by his own name. As many others have argued, this was due to Dickens' prejudice against Jews. Phelps is one of the many disgusted by anti-Semitism, and she wanted to portray Fagin as more than just the Jew in the miniseries. According to Misha Burson, Phelps turns the Jewish ringleader Fagin into a coyly, flamboyant cross-dresser who takes more than larcenous or paternal interest in a stable of boy pickpockets, unquote, Burson. Phelps also used Fagin in the miniseries to call out and expose anti-Semitism and the corruption Jews faced back then. In the novel, Fagin's death was about justice. In the courtroom where he was sentenced, Fagin was not able to, quote, read the faintest sympathy, unquote, Dickens 408, in any of the many faces present. As I stated, it was purely about justice. However, in Phelps' adaptation of Oliver Twist, quote, rather than Fagin's death being justice for the villain, it is clearly coded in this adaptation as a deliberate persecution of victimized and marginalized figure, unquote, the Victorian sage. Overall, Phelps uses her work to discuss the bigger problems that weren't so widely debated back then when the original novel came out, such as Dickens' whitewashed characters and his prejudice against Jews. According to the American Jewish Committee, quote, anti-Semitism has been called the world's oldest hatred. It is a tangible threat not only to Jews, but also to the very fabric of democratic societies. As violence against Jews intensifies, the anti-Semitism that drives it is emanating from the host of sources: political, ethnic, and religious, on college campuses, in public discourse, on social media, and across the globe, unquote, AJC. Anti-Semitism is no better than racism, homophobia, or transphobia. As people learn better, it is important to do better, which is why Sarah Phelps' adaptation of Oliver Twist is so significant. Phelps took a hurtful story that fueled hatred and prejudice, and she turned it into a powerful series that acknowledged many flaws. Anti-Semitism still exists today, not only in Western Europe and the Muslim world, but in America as well. In fact, quote, assault, harassment, and vandalism against Jews remain at near historic levels in the U.S. American Jews feel more vulnerable than they have felt in decades, unquote, ADL. Positive portrayals of Jews in literature and media will help make the necessary changes to heal the damage of anti-Semitism. In conclusion, Fagin has long been considered as the portrait of anti-Semitism in English literature. His character, originally introduced by Charles Dickens in Oliver Twist, was described as ugly, corrupt, miserable, and greedy. Fagin was an impoverished, villain-like figure who took advantage of homeless boys and raised them to be thieves. Dickens further made Fagin's Jewish ethnicity a crucial part of the storyline, as all of his evil-like qualities stem from the fact that he was a Jew. However, the depiction of Fagin and Jews in Dickens' Oliver Twist led to many critiques among readers and literary scholars. Since its original publishing, many have published their own adaptations of Oliver Twist. Sarah Phelps was one of many who put her own unique twist on Fagin in the classic novel in her 2007 miniseries. She developed a new Fagin through unbiased eyes, who viewers could now relate to. Ultimately, Phelps used her adaptation of Fagin to call out and expose anti-Semitism and the corruption Jews faced in the 19th century. Thank you!